Or Feely, I believe. We are live. We are live. Jesse tells me we are live. Hello. Are we all ready? It looks like we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion tonight. We're excited to be able to host this very important discussion the day before the 2020 election. And I know we're all full of a lot of feels today, but today we're here sponsored by the Center for Democracy and Deaf America with this event because we believe in encouraging healthy dialogue and discourse. This conversation is sponsored by Gallaudet Youth Programs, and we want to make sure that our youth are involved in these dialogues. Hello, everyone. I'm Aubrey, government major, and along with Lexi, I'm on the debate team as well. I'd like to welcome all of you to our discussion tonight. We're live on Facebook's page, so if you have a comment or question that you have for any of the four of us to respond to, please do send that to us. That'll be relayed to us and we'll answer. I'm going to ask Shoshana Stern, our special visitor, to introduce herself, our guests, and tell us a little more about why you wanted to accept this invitation to be with us this evening.
Natasha, do you want to go first?
Oh.
Sure. Hi, I'm Natasha O'Feely. I am so excited to be here to have this conversation with our deaf youth about such an important election and strange times for the state of our democracy. So I'm here with an open mind and open heart. I will give my points of view, some advice, and some thoughts on the process regarding voting and how and what you can do for us, present and future. So again, hi all. Well said. Okay, so I am Shoshana Stern. I am a Gallaudet alum many moons ago. And what is different, really many, there are a lot of them, but what's different between Gallaudet now and before, we were just talking with Aubrey and Lexi before we started the live stream. I saw them on the vice presidential debate event. And I mean, at the time we didn't have things like that. And I would say that we didn't really know how to think for ourselves and even how to disagree for ourselves. But the current generation is so good at that. You show up, you engage, they speak their minds, they know how to disagree. So I really am here to just amplify that message and honestly to learn from the two of you, because I really believe that you young people are going to save us. No pressure though. We're here to...
And speaking of young people involved in this election, what does voting mean to each of you, to your families, to your communities? What's at stake for you? Something to think about.
Aubrey?
Whoa. For me, as a Black man in America, it feels very important because my ancestors died so that I could be in this place to have this right to vote. And my first election was in 2012, and I was as green a voter as any, but I knew I had the opportunity to elect a Black man for president in the United States, and I was amazed and on board for that. I feel like it's an important legacy that we give to future generations. They can see the importance of our collective history. As we do now, we're in a time of change and we've got a long way to go. We still do, but we're here, and that's what's so important.
Amen. You know, let me add to that. Voting is so important in the year of 2020, and I realize that we can take democracy for granted, and that is a dangerous thing to do. When we vote, you know, we're not just voting for president, right? We're voting for people who are going to represent you, your communities, the mayors of your cities. And then obviously there are police commissioners and police community, and everybody else in the community is being represented. And so that information, that's really what drives democracy. And we need to do our homework. We need to do the research, read up on who stands for what so that we know who we're voting for. Because I'm voting for my family, I'm voting for my friends, I'm voting for my elders. And young people today are just amazing. I really bow before you because you stand up and you speak your mind, and it is awe-inspiring. And you are speaking for the present and the future. Democracy is so essential. And I mean, we've taken it for granted, and we really can't. We have to vote for our democracy.
That's the truth. Oh.
And for me, both my parents are first generation American born. So all of my grandparents fled their respective home countries and came to the United States in search of a better life. And what's interesting is that, so my family were Reformed Jews because our traditionally Orthodox Jewish families saw deaf people not just as deaf people, but as humans. You had to have 7 people. My grandfather was a deaf Jew, and he was not considered a man. So with what Aubrey just said, you're voting for a president who we want to be able to see us and see ourselves in them. Like my grandfather wanted to be seen as a man. And that's one of the main reasons that my family came to the US looking for a better life, to really be able to contribute our thoughts to being seen as human beings, as person. And that has a lot to do with why I do what I do as an actress. Me and Natasha have a greater responsibility than others who might not have such intersectional identities, because people want to see themselves and need to see themselves in us. And so we have, limitations in each of our own identities, but when we vote, that's how we can really actively represent ourselves and our voices and see who our elected representatives are and how they'll represent us if they're going to stand for what they believe in. So that's really the only way to continue the America that we believe in, and to become the America that we want it to be. We have to show up and vote.
Amen. Well said, Shoshana. Snaps to you.
After that.
Okay, so I'll ask the next question. I guess this is for the students, based on your experience studying government at Gallaudet and being now once or maybe once upon a time. Yeah, feel old sometimes, but it is true. We were all there once. What do you think our youth need to know about tomorrow's election? And how does the Electoral College work? Will we know the results of the presidential election immediately? Why or why not? Let me go ahead and start with Lexi first. Lexi?
Well, yeah, I hadn't planned on majoring in government until I came to Gallaudet, actually. I was more of a history buff, interested in it as a major. And the thing about it is, history is important to understand government, and government important to understand history. They're so intertwined.
They
and
really are.
Becoming a government major really gave me new eyes, different perspectives. This semester, I'm actually doing my honors paper on the Electoral College.
Oh, it's super complicated.
Interestingly enough. So
Hot stuff.
It's amazing. Because a public school and mainstream school, they go over it, they tell you a little bit about it, but they don't give you the details. They don't teach you in depth about it. I have to admit, I thought, Congress people were the electors. I didn't realize that among each of the 50 states is allotted a different number of electoral votes based on population. So California and Texas, for example, are 2 of the biggest states. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I think California has 55 and California has 76, 73, 36. Okay, correction. Thank you. And so just as one example, once the vote happens tomorrow, then if the Democrats get Texas, for example, then they are responsible for picking all of the electors of Texas. They get to nominate all of the electors for the party from their party in that race. So it's
wow, I'm learning so much. My mind
construct.
is blown.
I've ever seen it explained that way, and I finally get it. Wow, thank you. That really is mind blowing.
Me too. It's super complicated, and you just
It
explained.
is. It's so complicated, but simple too.
Lexi, I got to ask you something. Okay, so the Electoral College votes. No, wait, hold on. Let me process what I'm trying to say here. Okay, there's a popular vote, and then there's the electoral vote, and they are different. The electoral vote is more important than the popular vote, and why would that be?
Okay, the popular vote is part of the Electoral College in a way. So, for example, if Biden wins the popular vote in Texas, then he gets all 36 electors for Texas. But interestingly, 48 of the states do what we call winner takes all. So it doesn't matter if 51% of Texas voted blue and 49% voted red. That won't matter. The 51% get every elector allotted to the state. It's a winner take all system. And there are a couple of states that have more complicated systems. They don't do winner take all. And that's Nebraska and Maine. Yeah. And so it's based on congressional district. So sometimes their electoral college votes are split. If one district votes one way and the other different, it's amazing. Researching it has been really interesting as a government major. I feel like as deaf youth, we've really got to dig in, find this information online, learn about it. It's out there.
Honestly, Lexi, I think you're selling yourself short because I mean, I'm a pretty avid reader. I've read pretty extensively about the system, and this is the first time I've seen it broken down in a way that I understand it, and that's from you. It really is so simple. I was like, really, that's all? And it's not like I haven't tried. I have. I've looked online, and it just seems so complicated. And that's why I'm so grateful that we have people like Lexi and Aubrey. I hope that the two of you, and I'm sure there are many others like you, but there's many others like me too, who want to understand and just can't seem to.
It's taken me over 20 years to learn this. I don't even know. I did not understand the Electoral College at all until this moment. Lexi, I had a bit of an understanding, and Lexi, thank you so much for elucidating it. Okay, wow.
So
Aubrey, did you
for the second part of that though? Yeah, the second part of that question that Natasha asked is about whether or not we'll know the election results. Unfortunately, we won't, because among all the 50 states, we've got to think about the fact that there are millions of people voting. Some of these states still count ballots by hand. Some have extended processes for certifying their ballots. Some states may not know final ballots until December, but we'll mostly know by Friday. And so many of these mail-in ballots aren't counted until election day, and haven't been until that day. And then, help me out here, Lexi, what was the third category there?
No, I'm learning something new here.
Okay, so first there's Wisconsin, Michigan, and both of them don't count any ballots until the day of the election. So that means from tomorrow, they start counting all of them that have come in, all of them that come in tomorrow. So that's why the process takes a little longer. Tomorrow, though, we should get some sense of who the likely winner is, but we're not going to get a fully confirmed decision until possibly weeks down the road, even into December.
I have a question though. I don't know if either of you know, but I feel like you already know so much that I might as well ask. I read that some states actually aren't allowed to count until election day because that means that they can't start. Does that mean that they can't start counting until the polls are closed or just the beginning of the day? So can they start tallying votes at the start of the day?
Some of them at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Okay, so 10 a.m. Well, that's better to be able to start then than not being able to start counting until the polls are closed. Would that make a difference?
Well, I would rather all 51, well, DC is not counted as a state, it's a district, but I would rather all 50 states have early voting. And there are some states that don't have early voting at all. All voting happens in a single day. So their votes happen tomorrow and that's it. And there are some states, for example, so at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., if you were standing in line, you get to vote, period, no matter what. Now with the, downsizing of polling places because of COVID, things like that, and, that because of efforts in conservatives' efforts at voter suppression, let's say Alabama, Georgia, and so forth, the governor of Georgia did some things. There was a huge to-do about voter suppression there in Georgia, and that led to the governor winning because of the way they'd done the vote. And because of the downsizing in polling places, that's creating additional difficulty. We're going to have to see what happens, whether or not, those mail-in ballots are going to be really critical. Democrats, by and large, have been sending in mail-in ballots, but Republicans are likely standing in line to do their voting tomorrow.
Lexi?
I just wanted to add another example of voter suppression. So, for example, in Texas, I believe it was, in Smith County, I know it was one particular county.
Travis, I want to say.
Was it Harris?
I know it was like they were doing mail-in, and that was it. That was the only thing that they were doing for the entire, they had one place to drop their mail-in ballots, and that was it. One place in the whole county.
I have a question for Aubrey about counting votes. I believe I read this yesterday that, that something like 992 million people have already voted. And I know that they may start counting, like you said, tomorrow at 10 a.m. But what about those pre-day voters? Are they counting them first, or how does it work?
Well, that depends on the state. In Maryland, we're fine because we've had early voting and early counting, but some don't. Like I said, Michigan and Wisconsin are two that don't start counting votes until the voting day. And so those states, it's going to vary state by state. And someone asked on Facebook a question that I think we'll go ahead and answer. And the question was for me and Lexi specifically. Sorry to our stars here on board.
No, not at all. You have the goods.
Definitely. You definitely know more than we do.
Somebody asked about the Electoral College and whether it was dangerous and harmful to especially poor people. And so we're going to be doing a debate on November 11th on the Electoral College and whether or not you agree on what its potential to harm poor people. What do you think? A little preview of our debate, Lexi.
My first reaction is no, I don't think so. The Electoral College in its current form is, of course, the Electoral College, has flaws in it. Pretty much any major system is going to have its flaws, and there's a series of trade-offs. But I don't think that it disproportionately harms poor people because they're still voters. But I do understand the potential for voter suppression and the disproportionate effect on poor people. So I guess it varies, and maybe ultimately I would say yes and no, and it ultimately depends on where you live. Aubrey, what do you think?
Well, based on my research, the Electoral College was intended to protect marginalized communities, minority communities, from majority suppression of their rights. So in the time, though, that was based on states' rights and notions of states' rights, specifically Southern states who were actively practicing enslavement. And so that's why the Electoral College was a compromise between the northern states and the southern states of the day. And the reason we still have the Electoral College today. Sorry, I got a notification come up on my screen, was sidetracked. Let me backtrack a second.
You were saying
You were
north, south.
Right. Okay, so now fast forward to today. Now, based on the notions that the founding fathers never had any idea we'd have these kinds of millions of people, 60 million people. I mean, they had no idea we'd have these numbers. So how could we accurately represent all of these people? And so there are many who call for a switch to the popular vote, some who still support the notion of electoral college. I think there are merits to both and detriments to both. So now, does it disproportionately affect poor people? I would say everything in some way disproportionately affects poor people from some vantage. So yes, I'll say, yeah, with the impacts of voter suppression.
I'll say that with the census, I know that in California, specifically in LA, they really actively worked on making sure that people responded to the census. And some people were trying to make sure that censuses were not filled out by particular communities. And I had never realized that the census is so key to our democratic system, right? So now I truly understand its value. And I think that those who were seeking to suppress responses to the census are actually hoping that poor people don't get their voices heard.
Absolutely.
That's what I think, right?
Okay, but I just think it's interesting that some people are arguing that poor people are overrepresented by the Electoral College.
Really? How so? I mean, that interests me. So what's that based on?
So one example is cities tend to have more poor people concentrated and they're voting, and they do get representation there in the cities. But the fact is, our economy's not in the best shape right now. I'd say we've got more people below the poverty line than we do above the poverty line now. So we're seeing a greater division between the high class and low class earners. The wealthy are living in big states, and the poor are living in smaller states. And they do still have a voice in the Electoral College, despite the fact that they're more populated and concentrated in smaller states.
You know, I never thought of it that way. There are a lot of people who are living below the poverty line, and they're voting more than ever this time around. And I think we're seeing just a lot of people come out, more than came out in 2016, and they're realizing basically their lives are at stake. And there's just been a crazy global disruption, obviously, with the pandemic and everything else. And with voter suppression, we're seeing that even more than ever, or it's visible, people doing really with no shame these nefarious acts. So at least from my perspective, I think we need to make a stand for something, get out there and vote. You know, for a lot of people, it's their first time ever. Some people are in their 80s and their 90s, and they're making it. They're making it to the polls because they want to stand for something, and that, you know, their vote and their voice is finally being heard. I think it's actually a big celebration for a lot of people who have been energized that, you know, their vote actually matters.
For sure.
That makes me think of, you know, honestly, just the divisions that we are now seeing across so many sectors of the United States, that we are more polarized than ever. Whether you're characterizing us as red states and blue states, we have all of these lines in the sand drawn. And in the deaf community, we are already a pretty small community. And so I think that those divisions are felt even more deeply. And it takes me back to one of the most powerful moments in the Harris-Pence debates, where they took a question from an 8th grader who asked, if you can't get along, how can you expect us to? And Pence responded by idealizing Scalia and RBG's friendship, even though they shared vastly different political views. And Harris responded by discussing Biden's willingness to work across the aisle. Now, imagine if your preferred candidate wins or loses. How do you, I mean, in the deaf community, I'm sure that we know people who have opposing beliefs. So how do you feel, or how do you think deaf youth should respond? Do you think that deaf youth should try to get along with others inside and outside their communities despite political differences, even if we support different political candidates? Or should we not? Should we unfriend people? Should we be unwilling to listen to the other point of view? So what do you think? Why or why not?
Funny. Because, you know, I saw a Facebook post, I don't know, a little while back. And I had this image, kind of old-timey. And, you know, where you have two pictures and you got to find the 12 differences, you know, and circle them out. Circle the 12 things different in these two pictures, you know, those puzzles, right? So this, though, was done a little differently. It says, how do we see people who are different? How do we reject them? How are we accustomed to treating people who are different than us? How do we treat the norm and not the norm? What is it that people think of deaf people? And we're told, oh, I'll tell you later. Black people are told that you're not given the same worth, not given the same seat at the table. There's a book called Why Do Black People Sit? Wait, let's see. Why do all the Black people sit at the lunch table together? Well, we do it because there's a common ground that we have. We've navigated the same experiences together. We feel connection because of that. We feel the same kind of way about things. My point in saying this is that we consistently reject people who are different, but we've got to learn how to live together and coexist. That's the way to make the world a better place. And I'd say the best way to do that, give land back to Native Americans. Give the land back to Native Americans. It was their land first. And I think it's funny how we're all, oh, get the immigrants out of here. But this is all stolen land, stolen from people who weren't even from here, who then marginalized the people from here. And now we're telling people that aren't here yet, stay out, like it's our land. We've got to learn to share. We got to learn to share. We got to learn to compromise. We got to learn to value everybody. That's the only way we're going to get it better tomorrow.
Wow, that's deep. Yeah. I think, go ahead, Lexi.
Personally, I grew up in East Texas, you know, the Bible Belt. And then I moved to DC. If you can imagine my shock at encountering DC. And, you know, I encountered a lot of people that think differently than I do. And it was a great experience for me. I love talking with people with different views. That makes me grow as a person. I see the world in more colors because of it. So tomorrow night, depending on whatever the outcomes are, I am certain that we still have to engage with each other and connect. At the end of the day, all of us have personal reasons for voting for who we voted for. And you're not going to get to the root of the problems until you understand the whys, the why of it. And if you just shut people out, then you're never going to find out the why. You shut out the answer to that question. That creates the divide. It creates a deepening in that divide. So the more we dehumanize each other, the more we separate ourselves from each other, then I think we make this all last longer than it has to. I think what we can't do is shut each other out. That makes it a lot tougher. So something to think about is, how do we find out the whys for each other and our reasons for doing these things? We have to start with that. At the same time, though, it's okay to have boundaries. Boundaries are healthy. So it's tough to find that sweet spot between engaging with difference and learning and having boundaries that protect you and protect your personhood. That's the way I see it.
Natasha, what do you think?
I think that both Aubrey and Lexi's points are very well taken. I think that in terms of our deaf youth, that these divisions that we see are really difficult. We're not meeting each other halfway. It's like there's this widening chasm between these two polar opposites, and it's just a battle. We're not really communicating to each other, and communication is the key. And you can agree to disagree in some cases. And I think that we need to do that. We need to agree to disagree sometimes and really listen to each other, really try to get a bead on what's going on and have an open, healthy conversation. You know, my father-in-law, for example, is a Republican, and he's actually pretty devout in terms of being a Republican. And I've sat with him and had conversations with him, and I really have tried to be present, really try to understand where he's coming from. And he does the same. And it's not always easy. Sometimes it's tough, but it's important to have that dialogue and maybe find some common ground, you know, some middle ground between the two of us. And the funny thing is, when we try to do that, you know, my father-in-law, you know, I left on this one occasion and found out afterwards that he started doing his own research based on what we had talked about because he wanted to understand better. And he hand wrote me a letter, if you can believe that, explaining what he had learned from doing the research that was sparked by the fact that we had a real in-depth conversation. So I think, you know, there's a lot that we can learn. And truthfully, for me, that was like a victory dance moment. I was like, yes. And it was fairly, you know, simple just by sitting, by engaging in conversation, being open to that. And I learned something from him too, by learning from his point of view. I think, you know, you can't think something like Republicans are all bad people or whatever, you know, or Democrats are all radical or something. It's nothing. It's each individual has a, you know, a constellation of issues that they care about, and just getting to know them and really having a sense of the wider picture. I think that we will have better communication. You know, now we're talking about politics without getting angry, if we can do that. You know, maybe conceding when a point is well made, or, you know, I've never thought of it that way, and thinking about where we can find improvement. It's not perfect, but we will only get together and do well if we take a collaborative approach.
Well, you made me think about.
That just brought two things to mind. One, we often listen to answer instead of listening to communicate. And that has really become a mantra for me because it becomes truer and truer. Because it's more like when we're listening to someone else, what we're really doing is thinking about what we want to say to what they're saying to us. We don't actually give ourselves the time or space to process what they're saying and then respond. Yep. And what it also brought to mind for me was something that a professor said that really changed my perspective. And it kind of made me kind of go on a 180 here. The Republican and Democrat sort of continuum that gets presented to us is not actually the only way to think about our politics. It's really about the how. How does someone get from A to B? And that's really the biggest difference, because both can want the same thing. So how do you get there? Like Republicans, more or less, you could say, believe that people are the problem. And Democrats, by and large, kind of look at it like the system is the problem. But really, it's all about perspective. So I think that's also why it's so important to continue to engage. Like you just said, Natasha, that it's a matter of perspective taking. People don't really, you know, it's not good to respond to fire with fire.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Lexi. Exactly. That is beautifully said.
Yeah. So if you respond to someone else's anger with more anger and just being shut down, then you're not going to get anywhere.
Wow. Hey, Sho, do you have anything to say?
I'm still in awe of you guys. Honestly, I have a sense of hope. I've been really emotionally exhausted. I think a lot of us have these last few months. One of the best conversations I've ever had in my whole life was with a relative, an uncle-in-law, actually, who is an avid hunter, like his favorite sport, really into hunting. I'm a vegan. So whenever we go visit his family, and they live pretty far from us, it's a pretty rural area. So it's definitely a trek to get there. And then they've got like a gate that you have to get out and open before you can even go down the driveway to get to their actual house on the property. So just to paint that picture for you, we were at their house for Thanksgiving, with the turkey and all the stuffings and everything. And I'm the one that's got my vegan plate, and people are always passing sides to me and then feeling bad about it. And I'm not vegan because I look down on others who do eat animal products. It's simply a way that I show my beliefs. But when the two of us actually sit down and talk, this uncle-in-law of mine and I, we actually agree on so much. So he actually hunts because he loves nature and he wants to see animals in their natural habitat. And he feels like he's at one with them. And it's actually more of this game of himself as a human animal against another animal. I'm also a nature lover. But, and so I said, well, if you want a challenge, why don't you like go tackle an animal instead of using a gun? And he laughed at the question and was, okay, I can see your point. And we also talked about factory farming and how we get our food. And I feel like, honestly, if people want to eat meat, that's fine. But I think you should understand where it comes from. And if you can't stand to kill an animal, then you haven't really earned the right to put that piece of meat on your plate. You should really only eat what you earn. And he agreed wholeheartedly with that point. And it's like, so I know that there's no way I could kill an animal, so I'm not going to eat one because I can't earn it. I'm not going to go the lazy route and just grab something off the shelf at the grocery store. At least when he hunts an animal, he uses every single part of the animal. He hates trophy hunting. He's against it. And that uncle never really talks that long. So his wife came over because we were sitting down for like 2 hours and his wife came over and was like, "Are you okay?" And I told my husband that was the best conversation I've ever had in my whole life because we are so different and we would have never otherwise realized how much we actually have in common. And social media can be a great unifier, but also a great divider because there's so much, as a public figure that you get thrown at you. And I know it's not about me personally, it's about something that has triggered something in another person. And I know that if I were to approach a person who said something negative on social media, they wouldn't be like that face to face. So I think a lot of this contentiousness is really on social media. We don't actually really act like that in person. I love this example of being able to talk with people. I love talking with you three. This is amazing. I feel like if, social media were more like this, where you could sit down and have a conversation with people, you would learn so much more. And I hope we could work towards that from here on out, especially, with people who know their shit, like the two of you do, Lexi and Aubrey.
Well, we've got just a few minutes left, and I want to take advantage of the time we've got to ask a last question. Tomorrow's a big day, Election Day. How can young people make a positive impact on Election Day, even if they can't vote? So if you're in high school, but you really care about this election, what can those people be doing to get more involved? Lexi, it looks like you're really eager to jump in.
So, I follow lots of young adult authors. I'm really into young adult fiction. And so that question was actually posted on one of my favorite authors' social media pages today. I mean, there are things that you can do even if you're not able to vote yet. You can volunteer at the polls. They certainly need poll workers. Like Sho just said, use your social media presence. I know everybody, especially deaf youth, they have Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you name it, they have it. So use that as a tool for good to spread the word, encourage other people who are eligible to vote to get out there because the vote matters. Tell them that. So even young people still have tools that they can use to encourage other people to get their voice out there.
Oh, well, okay. I was gonna, ask you to respond, but okay, let's see. I can't beat that answer. So I will say I'm the oldest of 5 in my family. What I'm doing is setting an example for my younger sisters. My 3 younger siblings are in high school. And I know one of them wants to go to the Air Force. My advice to young people, don't hold back. Speak your mind. Put it out there. Communicate. Start having dialogue with people. I talk with my sister just like I talk with my professors. We have those same kinds of conversations. What do you think about that? What are you reading over here about that? What have you learned about that? That amazes me because my sister is light years ahead of some 15-year-olds and light years ahead of me, smarter than me. And, I brag my friends, I might be think I'm the smartest man in the room, but I am not, because the smartest person in my family is clearly my 15-year-old sister. And I can be talking about anything. She's got something to say about it, something to pipe in. And like, just for example, perfect example, focus on financial freedom, right? So she asked me, have you set your savings account? I was struck. Yeah. You see what I mean? Just like that. I never thought about it the way that she does. At 15, she's already thinking about saving for future years. By the time she's 18 and ready to vote, I'll tell you what, oh yes. And funny, I bring this up because next year we're going to be having a debate bowl with young high school debaters. We're going to have the chance to come together and debate. And their topic is going to be about whether or not the voting age should be reduced to 16. Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I'm of the unpopular belief that I think the age should be raised to 21. Because I think young people's minds aren't fully developed until they're what, in their 30s? But no, you don't have to agree with me. That's a personal opinion.
Interesting.
That's so interesting because I think that it should be lowered to 16. If we trust 16-year-olds to drive, why not trust them to vote?
But you look at the accident rate of young people, drivers under 21. I mean, insurance companies have a reason for charging them.
I'm proud to say I'm not one of those. I've never been in an accident. I know, that's right. I'm not allowed to rent a car until I'm 25.
That's
fair point.
25.
Exactly. So to everybody watching, I'll say to you, go vote if you haven't voted. And it's important, as you see, the 4 of us are up here telling you our thoughts, theories, actions, experiences. We're all bringing that here just to tell you that the stage is yours. Talk to your family, your friends, use your social media, engage with people, drive, take people to the polls. Make sure your voices are heard. A special thanks to Gallaudet University for hosting this panel, for the Center for Democracy in Deaf America, for Gallaudet Youth Programs. Thank you so much for supporting this.
I'd also like to add another point. Yes, vote, but don't forget to take care of your own mental health. Make sure that you've got a place lined up that you can be tomorrow night when the results are coming in, so that you have a place to talk to someone who can give you the support that you need, be it a friend or family member, because we're going through such trying times with the pandemic and everything else. So it is time to bring this evening's conversation to a close. I would like to thank the Center for Democracy in Deaf America, the Director Director Disagreement, Lorenzo Lewis, and Gallaudet Youth Programs Director Jesse Saunders for working backstage. They've both been monitoring all the stuff behind the scenes. Thank you both so much.
I also want to encourage everybody to watch the election results tomorrow. We will be right back here tomorrow on Gallaudet's Facebook page, 7 to 8:30. That's Eastern time. So please do tune in.
Right. And to add, one more thing before we close. The question about how to get involved doesn't end with an election. It begins with an election. There's always something going on. There's always something that needs your support, something that should be discussed, connections to be made. So I do hope that this is teaching us to show up, speak out, and listen. Okay, now I'll step off my soapbox. I wanted to point out that tomorrow night's event will feature a conversation with Gallaudet administrators, faculty, staff, and alumni who are going to bring their areas of study, experiences, and insights to reach deeper understandings of the election and the latest results as they come in. So as results come in, they'll give their insights and very valuable thoughts.
I know some of the professors who are on the panel, and I just want to let you know you should definitely tune in.
Yes, yes. And with that, I'm going to bid everyone a good night and thank you. Thank you.
Good night.